Hey, and welcome back to J.P.'s World of Wrestling. I am a man, J.P., and today's subject is one that I've been wanting to do for a really long time. Ever since I thought about it yesterday, I wanted to do it. Anyway, so today's subject is Galoobs versus Hasbros. That's right, WCW Galoob figures versus WWF Hasbro figures. Not so much which one is better, whatever, but basically just some comparisons. So, one thing I always noticed about the two figures is that Hasbro figures were always more cartoonish, shall we say, than the Galoob figures. The Galoob figures were always more realistic, detailed, and they were always sized more realistically. And that was sort of reflective of the style of wrestling because WWF was always more cartoonish and very heavily gimmicked, as opposed to WCW, which on one hand was not completely void of gimmicks, but they also had way less gimmicks and more realistic storylines. Basically, WCW was more just professional wrestling, whereas WWF was more like entertainment. So, and their action figures reflected that. So I'm going to show you a few action figures from my collection just to kind of show you what I mean. So here's a couple of Hasbro figures. It's Honky Tonk Man and Greg the Hammer Valentine, but if you notice, they're both exactly the same size. They both are exactly the same height. But then here's Hulk Hogan. If you look, actually Hulk Hogan is just a little bit shorter than Greg Valentine. But from a realistic standpoint, Hulk Hogan basically towers over Greg Valentine. I've seen Hulk in person. Now, Greg Valentine was never like a small man by any means, but I've also seen Hulk in person, and Hulk is a big, huge man. I mean, the guy was like 6 foot 8 inches, so he was pretty tall. But this figure makes him look kind of short. He's actually a little bit shorter than Greg Valentine. Now that's where sort of my imagination had to kind of take over. Because even like the Giant Gonzalez Hasbro figure was just a little bit slightly taller than all the rest of the figures. So he had to kind of pretend that he was like 8 feet tall. You had to pretend that he was doing big clubbing forearms to the back or whatever. But now let's look at some WCW Galoob figures. Here's the Steiner brothers, but as you can tell, Scott Steiner is just a little bit taller than Rick. And I think that's true. I think Scott is a little bit taller than Rick. But let's look at Sid Vicious. Much taller than Scott Steiner. Much taller than most of the other wrestlers because he was. Sid Vicious was like 6'10", almost 7 feet tall. So yeah, he's gonna be taller than anybody. So so WCW Galoobs, they were more realistically sized, and the way the figures looked were more like realistic. They didn't have any cheesy power action move or whatever. It was just a wrestling figure, because the Galoob people actually understood what playing with wrestling figures was all about. I'm not complaining about Hasbros. I love the Hasbros. I'm just saying I never needed that. I never used that. So, but yeah, the biggest comparison, or the biggest difference, was the sizing. Now, I've always been a stickler for poses. To me, it's interesting when I post a video about poses, or when I watch somebody else's video talking about wrestling figures. It's always interesting to me to hear somebody else's perspective on what makes a good wrestling figure. And I mean, for me, it's all about the pose. It's all about the wrestling pose. Is the pose usable? Is the pose realistic? Like this Hogan figure, I played with this Hogan figure a lot, but not because it's a fantastic pose, but because it was the only one available to me at the time. You know, the hands are open, but I would use my imagination. I've just uh, a lot of forearms to the back, a lot of like blows to the side of the head. You know, that's kind of what I would do. But on the other hand, I like it much better when you don't have to use your imagination as much. And whenever they have a wrestling figure that's like this, where both hands are fists, you can punch very easily. But again, I don't need that. But that's just me. But I watched a video of a guy talking about like some of his top 10 like worst wrestling figures, and one of them was the Mountie. And the reason why he picked the Mountie was because the Mountie was in an outfit that he didn't wrestle in. He was like kind of in his interview outfit. Now personally, I can understand his perspective. Like I can understand why he wouldn't like that figure for that reason. I always liked the Mountie figure, but that's because the Mountie figure was always in a pose that I could use. I never really had the Mountie. I'm just saying that I would be able to use the Mountie. But then if you look at, Galoob compared to Hasbro, Sid Vicious towers over Hogan, but realistically it'd be more like that, where Hogan would be just kind of a couple inches shorter than Sid. But yeah, but all of the Hasbros were basically the same height. Now I was never really stickler for height, really, because the Jake the Snake Roberts LJN figure was always way too short, being as how Jake the Snake Roberts was always kind of a tall wrestler, but his LJN figure was short. But I never really cared as much about that. And I'll show you one other thing. If you look at Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff's LJN figure, the thing is huge. He looks absolutely enormous. Like height-wise, though, it's not much, difference between him and the Sheik. But there were actually some LJN figures that were taller, like the Andre the Giant, Big John Studd. Those were both taller figures because they were taller in reality. But I think that's one of the only things I didn't like about the Hasbros is that all of the figures were basically the same height, even ones that were supposed to be super tall. But that's a small petty thing, I think. And yes, on this channel I seem to complain a lot about poses, but honestly, when I was a kid, I just used my imagination. When I was a kid, I didn't complain too much. Like if I saw a figure in the store that I didn't like, I just didn't buy it. It was that simple. And basically, most of the figures where the poses were like this, I didn't care about those figures, so I wouldn't buy those. It's as simple as that. But that's just me. So, in review, Hasbros, all basically kind of the same size, more cartoony, power action move. Galoobs, realistically sized, realistically detailed. No power action move, just a solid pose. Which one is better? That's not for me to decide solely. I'm just, for me, I liked both action figure lines. I played with both of them. And yes, I did use Galoobs with the Hasbros. I never had an issue with that because they were both pretty much kind of the same size. So I never had an issue with that point. But I can see where somebody else might say, oh, I'm not going to use the Hasbros with the Galoobs. So, Hasbros versus Galoobs. I like both. That's all I got to say about that. They both get a thumbs up from me. And now the last time I opened up my King Kong Bundy Zombie Sailor Toys figure. But I had to kind of do it out in my living room at our computer desk just because my wife was in here still sleeping. But today she's at work and I can use the bedroom. It's Saturday and I'm not at work, but here's kind of maybe a closer look at it. But yeah, see? No power action move necessary. So once again, I say Zombie Sailor Toys, very, very, very good job. I love this figure. Now let's compare him to Dino Bravo. As you can see, a little bit taller. That's because they were trying to get it kind of realistic looking. They're trying to get it realistically sized. So things were already kind of stirring in my head, like, oh, if I was a kid, I would immediately have King Kong Bundy come in. I would do a main event match. Hulk Hogan versus Dino Bravo. Sometime towards the end of that match, Bundy would come in and attack Hogan, setting up a Bundy Hogan feud. But that's kind of a classic. I don't know. It's just something that spun through my head immediately when I got that figure. And I started, because sometimes with this ring up here, sometimes just for funsies, I'll just stand here and I'll play with the figures in this ring here, where it is right here. There's like a little bit of a space off to the side here where Mean Gene Okerlund stands. Sometimes they'll interview the wrestlers before they go in. If I had a way to kind of mount a camera, like either here or on my head or something, that might be something fun to try to work out. But anyway, and up here, when the wrestlers are slammed, it sounds really good. You know, but anyway. I'm rambling now. So again, to review. You know, Galoobs, Hasbros. Which one is better? I don't know. I like both, like I've said before. So, what are your thoughts? Are you completely just a Hasbro guy? Are you a Galoob guy? Or, I know some of you out there also play with the AWA Remco figures. So, I want to hear about that. Or were you an LJN guy? Tell me about it in the comments below. So that is going to do it for this video. So if you're new here, if you're just watching this video for the first time, you like what you see, we're having fun over here, go ahead and click that like button, and go ahead and click the subscribe button, and I will see you next time.